Crossroads kids! I'm back with another lesson for you, working our way through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first 4 books of the New Testament. So several weeks ago, when we were talking about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness by Satan, we said that when he came out of the wilderness, John the Baptist saw him coming, and he called the first few of his disciples to follow him. A couple of them had been followers of John the Baptist, and they left John the Baptist and began to follow Jesus. But where did the rest of the disciples come from? We only talked about Jesus calling the first few. So today we're going to talk about the rest of the disciples. Where did all 12 disciples come from? And when did Jesus call them to follow him? But before we get into that story, we're going to practice saying the verses together that we're learning as a class. When they come up on the screen, pause the video and read them together. All right, let's start at the beginning. Who did Jesus call first and where? So Jesus left Nazareth and he went to Capernaum. And in Capernaum there was the shore of the lake of Galilee. Jesus sees 4 fishermen out on the lake of Galilee and calls them. So the first 2 he saw were Simon and Andrew, 2 brothers. They were fishermen. And when he meets them and calls them to follow him, they're out there fishing. They're casting their net into the lake of Galilee. And when he meets Simon in particular, he says, "Simon, from now on, your name will be Peter." He changed Simon's name completely. So he's no longer Simon. He is now Peter. You'll sometimes see Peter called Simon Peter. That's the guy they're talking about. That's Peter. His name was no longer Simon from the time that Jesus changed it. Now, as we work our way through the 12 disciples, you'll notice that quite a few of them have 2 names. There are different reasons for this, but Peter was the only one where Jesus actually changed his name, and that's why he's called Peter. So we had Peter and Andrew, 2 brothers who are fishermen. Then there were 2 other brothers that Jesus also saw out on the lake, also fishermen, James and John. Now, James and John were both the son of a man named Zebedee, so sometimes you'll hear them called the sons of Zebedee. And they're also known as the sons of thunder. What a nickname. So James and John, sons of thunder, sons of Zebedee, brothers who were fishermen. Now, there are 2 James among all of Jesus' 12 disciples. So to keep them straight, sometimes we call them James the elder and James the younger. Elder means older, so one of them was older and one of them was younger. Now, James and John, that James is James the elder. He was one of the first disciples to be called. And John, his brother, wrote the books of John and Revelation. He was the one on the island of Patmos when he was really old that wrote the book of Revelation. So far we've got Peter and Andrew, brothers, James and John, brothers. All 4 of them were fishermen, and Jesus called all 4 of them off of the lake of Galilee. The next one Jesus calls is Philip. Now Philip, Jesus hunts him down basically. The Bible says that Jesus went looking for him. He had Philip in mind. He was gonna find him, and he did. And as soon as he found Philip, he said, "Follow me," and Philip was obedient and did. So Philip was the 5th disciple. Now, there was also Nathanael. Philip went and told his friend Nathanael. And when Jesus met Nathanael, he's the one that said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And he said, "Well, come and see, come meet him." And when Jesus meets Nathanael, he says, "Nathanael, I saw you when you were under the fig tree." And immediately Nathanael knows, this is the Son of God. He saw me under the fig tree. How could he have seen me under the fig tree? Now, some people think that Bartholomew and Nathanael are the same person, and they had 2 different names. We're not exactly sure, but we know that Bartholomew was a disciple of Jesus, and Nathanael is not mentioned among the 12 that Jesus ultimately calls to be his closest group of disciples. So were Nathanael and Bartholomew the same person? We're not 100% sure, but they might have been. So we've got Philip and Bartholomew. Next is Matthew, the tax collector. Now, why were tax collectors considered so awful, so evil? Why did religious leaders in Israel not even consider them worth teaching about the Messiah? Well, you have to remember, God had designed Israel to govern itself. It was supposed to be a free nation, only answering to God. But whenever the people would fall into sin, God would allow Israel's enemies to come in and take over as punishment. So during the time that Jesus was on earth, one of Israel's enemies, Rome, was controlling Israel. And there were a lot of Romans occupying Israel to make sure Israel obeyed Rome. Now there were certain people, tax collectors, who were actually Israelites, but they had betrayed their country and were working for Rome. So they were answering to Rome and making money. And they didn't care that they weren't being loyal to the nation of Israel. Now, not only were they betraying their country, as if that weren't bad enough, they often stole from their fellow Israelites. So, for example, Rome would say, you need to collect 3 coins from each Israelite man. And they would go to each man and say, I need 5 coins from you for Rome. They would lie. And when the man gave them 5, they'd keep 2 for themselves and give 3 to Rome. And that was how they became really, really rich. So someone like Matthew was pretty much hated by other Israelites. So Matthew happens to be stationed in Capernaum, where Jesus is, collecting taxes. And Jesus comes up to his tax collecting booth and he says, Matthew, leave this job and follow me. This would be a big decision because it meant Matthew not only giving up his crooked, deceitful lifestyle, but giving up incredible wealth and comfort. Following Jesus, he would probably be poor and uncomfortable most of the time. And Matthew immediately knows it's worth it. Giving up a life of sin and even wealth for the opportunity to follow Jesus and have relationship with him, totally worth it. And so he immediately is obedient to Jesus and gets up and leaves his job and follows. Now he invites Jesus and the other disciples to his home for a meal. And Jesus and all the disciples go, and guess who else goes? All of Matthew's tax collector friends. He invites them to come over and meet Jesus too. Most religious leaders in Israel, like I said, they did not consider tax collectors people worth teaching about the Lord. And Jesus does. So some of the other religious leaders find out about this and they question the disciples and they say, hey, why does your teacher here, your rabbi, eat with sinners? And Jesus answers them. He says, listen, doctors don't come to help people who are well. They come to help people who are sick. I came to rescue sinners, not good people. And so Jesus loves sinners. He loves people like Matthew. He loves the tax collectors. He loves people like us, right? We'll continue on with the next 6 disciples in the second part of our story time. But first, your verse is going to pop up on the screen again. I want you to pause the video and read it together as a class. All right, so we've talked about the first 7 disciples. First, he called 4 fishermen. There was Peter and Andrew, who were brothers, and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were brothers, all fishermen. Then there was Philip, who Jesus went looking for and found and called him to follow him. Then there was Bartholomew, who may have been the same person as Nathanael, but we're not 100% sure. One thing we know for sure about Bartholomew is that he was from Cana. That's where he lived. We've got Philip, Bartholomew, and then we talked about Matthew, the tax collector. Guess what? Matthew had a second name. His name was also Levi. Sometimes he's called Matthew, sometimes he's called Levi. Now, the last 5 disciples, we don't know as much about how or when Jesus called them to follow him, because as Jesus went around teaching and preaching and doing miracles, many, many people began to follow him. They went with him wherever he went, and they listened to all of his preaching. And he had crowds that followed him wherever he went. And finally, Jesus decided to call just 12 certain men that would be his inner circle. They would travel with him everywhere he went, and they would be given power to preach and teach in his name and to do certain miracles like healings and casting out demons. So that's when Jesus specified the 12. Of course, there were the 7 that were already there. And then out of the other crowds that followed him, he chose 5 more. The first of which was Thomas. So Thomas is one of the ones that has 2 names. Thomas had a Greek name as well, which was Didymus. So Thomas, Didymus, same person. And Thomas is the guy that after Jesus was resurrected, came back to life, the other apostles ran to tell him, and he said, I don't believe it. Unless I actually put my finger in his wounds, I don't believe that he came back to life. That was Thomas. That was Didymus. So we've got Thomas as the 8th apostle. Then the 9th one, we have James the Younger. So remember, James and John, the brothers, the sons of thunder, sons of Zebedee. James the Elder was the brother of John. Now we're talking about James the Younger. This is a different James, not related. And he is sometimes called James the son of Alphaeus. His father's name was Alphaeus. He was a brother to Jude, another one of the apostles. So we've got James and Jude, who are brothers. So James and John is James the Elder. James and Jude is James the Younger. See if you can keep that straight. I know it gets a little complicated. Next we have Simon. Simon was known as the Zealot. Zealots were a band of people who wanted the Romans out of Israel, and sometimes they went through to extreme measures. Sometimes there were bands of zealots that had daggers and they would attack Roman centurions and soldiers. So he may have had a violent past. He may have been attacking Romans to get them out of Israel. We don't know, but we know that Simon was called a zealot. Then there was Jude, also known as Thaddeus. So this is the brother of James the Younger. James and Jude were brothers. But Jude also has a second name, and his second name is Thaddeus. So confusing. But we're going to keep this straight. James and John is James the elder, and James and Jude is James the Younger. Got it? Okay, we only have one left, and I bet you can guess who it is. It's the one who betrayed Jesus. Judas Iscariot, also just known as Judas. Judas was the one who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Very sad. That's all 12. Now, of the 12, 11 of them became amazing leaders of the early church. Only Judas did not follow in those footsteps. But these were 12 men who were with Jesus for 3 solid years, who had incredible power given by God to preach and teach and do miracles. All right, it is our craft time. So if you've been with our class for a little while now, you probably know that you're each building a binder that will tell the story of Jesus' life here on earth as we work our way through the Gospels. So for today's page in our binder, we're going to make a page that has the 12 disciples on it. You'll notice mine up here says example, but you need to put your name on yours. Sometimes these don't make it into your binder while you're here, and later we'll try to put it in the correct binder, but if there's no name on it, we don't know which binder to put it in. So make sure you put your name on it and try to get it in your binder while you're here. Now on each of the 12 disciples, you'll notice there's a white rectangle. You need to complete their outfit. So you're going to take a little rectangle of felt like this. These will be on your tables. And you'll take your glue dauber and you're going to dab glue all over the white rectangle and then stick a piece of felt on that you think goes good with that disciple's outfit. So once you have this all done and all 12 of your disciples have a completed outfit, I also have a challenge sheet for you. Now, because I'm not here this week, I want you to see if you can do this challenge sheet and show me when I come back next week. So here it is. It's a little tricky. Now only do this if you have time after completing your other craft, and then tuck it in your binder with your craft. But if you have time, you're going to look at these clues that are given about each disciple and try to match it with the disciple that it goes with. Your substitute teacher will have an answer key. So if you think you've got them all, have them checked and see if you got them all right. But next week I'm going to see how many of you were able to complete this. Also, down here at the bottom, there's the disciples again. You'll notice that there's boxes around some of them, but not all of them. This is a little mystery for you to figure out. Look at the ones that have boxes around them and see if next week you can tell me why you think those particular ones have a box. What does that box mean? That's my challenge to you. I can't wait to see you next week, guys. Go ahead and go to your craft tables.